Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Encouragers United podcast for this week. I have the great pleasure to introduce a new friend of mine to you, Mr. Dave Ebert. Say hi to everybody.
Hey, everybody! I'm glad to be here. Listen to a few of your shows and really have enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Dave is actually the founder and a member of Well Versed Improv Comedy. That's right. There you go. You got it. And Acts so Funny. I love it. And you are a podcast host yourself. And that's kind of how we got connected here. Your show is called Gifts for Glory. But Dave, you're an overcomer. You got yourself quite a story, and I love it. And so, why don't you just share a little bit of the highlights of how you've ended up in the area working in improv and comedy?
Sure, it's all God's story. It's God's story in and through me. All my life, I was somebody that liked to entertain and make people laugh, and it basically it became kind of a in some. And I don't want to sound the bad, but it was kind of a drug. I just love the feeling of seeing joy on somebody else's face. It started when I was a kid. I would go with my parents everywhere, and one of the earliest pictures that we used to have was an old Polaroid of me flexing like I was a bodybuilder because we were at a city pool that had a bodybuilding competition going on at the same time. So I, as 2-year-old Dave, couldn't let my thunder be stolen. So I had to flex and perform, and there's just that Polaroid is long since gone, but I just remember that picture. And when I first asked, I said, "Mom, what's this picture about? What am I doing?" And she explained it. I was like, "Oh, okay. So I come by this naturally." Uh, and the humor went from being this pure thing to being a defense mechanism through high school, college, and beyond. Because I entered into this really deep depression where I was looking for justification each day to justify why I'm still alive. What's my purpose? Do I add value to the world? And if I could make somebody laugh, if I could entertain, then when I got into pro wrestling for a while, if I could have a good match and be part of a successful show, then now I had value. I had a
Mm.
reason that I was here. I always believed in God, but I was spent all those years in depression away from Him, upset at God, cursing God, like, leave me alone, just let me live my life,
Yeah.
stop interfering. And I was really in a dark place, but I used humor as a way to deflect so people didn't know how I was feeling. At the same time, it was a way for me to make sure other people weren't feeling the way I was, because if I could do that, then I had the value to justify my existence.
Mm.
And it once I dedicated my life back to the Lord in 2013, that was when I realized that my humor, my performing, my love of being in front of people could now be redeemed. So instead of and the way I try to explain it is, I used to use comedy to hide who I was. Now I use comedy to reveal who He is,
Mm.
and so that's how I got into
Absolutely.
comedy.
Oh, what a beautiful phrase. Oh, I love it. And another thing, I read a quote that you shared in some of your bio stuff, and I want you to kind of spin this out for us, is that you spent many, many years
Mm,
thinking of, ending your own life
yeah.
and taking your life. Um, and there are many, many folks who are out there that struggle with this, and that's why you're on the show today, because we want to talk to you and talk about the place that you were. But what happened with you, as I've read your background, is that you spent all those years contemplating taking your life, but there was this transition or this paradigm shift. You then now said, I could either take my life or I can give my life. Tell me
Yeah.
about that phrase and what that means to you.
Yes, it really reached a climax at the end of 2012 to 2013. I was just, and it's really seems weird to maybe say it, especially if somebody's not a Christian, hasn't walked with the Lord. But I was at this path where I reached this pinnacle where, on the left side, I could take my life and just end it, stop the pain, and just get it over. And on the right hand side was like, I need to give my life to the Lord. And there was a civil war. But looking back, there was all these different signs, all these different messages that God was like saying, "Come this way, come to the right." My truck had gotten broken into twice over the holiday season in 2012. The only thing I lost was the driver's side window that they broke in to get into the car. They didn't take anything. They didn't damage anything else. They're just shards of glass that I was cleaning out for years. Um, and it was an inconvenience because I was only working part time and I had to spend $150 on two different occasions for a new window. But all things considered, that's not a huge ordeal. Um, I was not able to move up from part time to full time at my radio station job, a job that I started in a full time position on the FM side on a country station, and they demoted me because the general manager at the time preferred to have a female disc jockey at that point. So he moved me to the AM side, which was in many ways a huge demotion. But to show you how God works, that AM station was a solid gospel station. So even
Mm.
in my misery, God was still pouring into me. And, these are pastors that I wouldn't normally go to see because, the Southern gospel, and the Lord, and the Lord. And it's like, it's not what I would choose, but it was still, the Lord was giving me messages and pouring into me, even though I didn't know I was receiving it. The mind still records and it's like, oh, okay, we're going to file that for later, file that for later. So for a couple of years, I'm sitting behind a control panel operating a gospel station, and the Lord is just pouring in that whole time. And the real climactic moment was there's a Saturday morning. I lived in uptown Beckley, West Virginia, near the courthouse, a police station, not a lot of residences out there. So I was in an apartment building, 300 square foot apartment. It was tiny and uncomfortable because I'm almost 300 square feet myself. But so I'm walking to work this Saturday morning. I'm running late. I live 2 blocks from the radio station. And there's these two kids just happened to be out there from a Bible college. And they were passing out tracts. And for those who don't know, a tract is basically a small comic book that's got a gospel message to it. So they're passing this out and witnessing and trying to pray for people. I blew them off. I wasn't in any relationship with the Lord at that point, but I told them, yeah, I pray, I'm good, but I'm late. I gotta go. So I blew them off. But the seed was planted, and I was like, okay, God is trying to reach out to me. God is trying to pull at my heart and make me go from that pinnacle to the right side of the mountain where I give my life. So from that point on, I started reading Rick Warren's book, Purpose Driven Life,
Mm.
and realized my purpose is to entertain and to use entertainment to reach people in a special way. So 6 weeks later, I'm starting my life completely over on my sister's couch in suburban Chicago, having quit the radio station, moved up with what little I had, and just started completely over in March of 2013.
Wow. And so you're working both as an improv artist yourself, a comedian, but I see that you're teaching improv as well. Tell us about that part of your life. You're actually an instructor and you're working with groups and with individuals. How did that start?
Sure. So most of my improv training is very unconventional. I mentioned briefly that I did pro wrestling. So most of my knowledge of performance and improvising is from the world of wrestling because improv and wrestling are so similar.
Yeah.
In wrestling, you're in this theater in the round, and you're incredibly vulnerable because most wrestlers wear very little clothing in the ring. So there's this vulnerability and there's potential for accidents, potential for misses, and also most matches are have a start, a finish, and like a story that they want to tell.
Yeah.
You have kind of a start to the game, you have a story that you want to try to create, and you know kind of how you want to end it. So you feed off the audience, you feed off your scene partner, or in wrestling, your opponent. And if it's going really well, sometimes it goes longer than expected. If it's going really poorly, you'll cut it off short so you get to the next one so you don't lose your audience. So most of my training is pro wrestling. And so nowadays I try to take what worked for me and what taught me wrestling and how I learned it. And I don't use folding chairs or ladders or anything right
That's
now.
good. That's good.
Um, but right now, I offer improv as two things: either for performance to help either actors or wannabe improvisers and help them develop those skills. But the one I'm most excited about is using it as a ministry. I One of the things that's been such a blessing to me is I teach improv at Salt and Light Coalition in Chicago. Salt and Light works with women who have survived sex trafficking. So once a month,
Mm,
I go into Chicago, or in 2020, I've been doing it remotely, and I teach improv as a way to improve communication, tap into the creative cortex of the mind that has been shut down. Because the women I'm working with, they have been through literal hell on earth.
mm,
They've been abused, neglected, tortured, bought and sold like
mm.
property, literal slavery, and they're rebuilding their lives. They're carrying scars and burdens from that life, and so my job is one of the biggest things that has to be said is I'm a man being trusted to work with these women who have been abused by men, and that is not lost on me. I understand the weight of my responsibility as a man to be somebody that's safe, to come in and work with them in love and care and respect, with no judgment, and to use improv as a way to tap into the creativeness, and to build ways to understand communication, because part of improv is understanding that there's more than what's just being said. It's body language, it's facial features, it's the stance, the countenance. So for these ladies, they're actually learning how to recognize what people mean more than what they're saying. So that is,
Yeah,
that's a thing. And like I told you, and I mentioned, if none of that works, if I'm a horrible teacher and none of that works, at least an hour a month, they're getting to laugh like little girls, possibly for the first time ever,
sure.
because some of these women were sold into trafficking by their parents at very young ages.
Mm. Yeah,
And it's,
that is such a tragedy, but here you are. You put your head down and you run right into it with what God's given you, which is the ability to laugh and to hopefully bring cheer to some people that really need it. But at the same time, really teaching a life skill. So that's awesome. Um, as a Christian person, I think my background is in athletics and in education, and now as a musician, as a worship leader, to
mhm.
integrate faith into an art like that, or into a performance. Have you ever felt like being a Christian, especially in comedy or especially improv and stand up comedy? Is that a limit? Is there a limit on you because you're a Christian?
Well, the way I look at it is this: we serve the ultimate creator, and we're in his image. So we are in no way limited because he's not limited. And I know that some will think that, well, you can't curse, you can't talk about this, that, or the other thing. Why do we need to? I mean, there's a legitimate need to protect the marriage bed. We shouldn't talk
Yep.
about those sort of things, except if you're at a Christian marriage
Yeah, there you
conference.
go.
My wife and I, we do some improv together, and there's opportunities there for us to address things within that context of being married couples together talking about marriage.
Yeah,
But in general, that stuff's just not necessary, and
yeah.
it's so abundant and so available that we don't need to. And we found that, and I found that by being different, that becomes really attractive. And here's the thing: when we're doing our comedy, no one has to pause and look to make sure it's okay to laugh. We've been in situations where we've performed at a bar, at a comedy night, where each comedian before us, they were doing their stand up, they were progressively worse and vulgar and sexually charged. And each punchline would have that split-second pause where you'd see people were wanting to make sure it was okay to
Yeah.
laugh before they did. We go up there, we do some clean improv comedy that's just pure, and there's no judgment, there's no questionable content. And we got the loud, and I don't say this to boast, but I say this to boast in Christ, that we got the loudest reactions because there was no need to hesitate. If you saw something you appreciated or recognized, you could just laugh.
That's right. Yeah.
And, I'll always say that God is the ultimate improviser, because when you're doing improvise comedy, you're walking onto a blank stage and you're speaking and creating a universe with each motion, with each breath. that's what God did. He walked onto a blank canvas and he just created it by speaking.
Mm.
So God is the ultimate improviser, but I would not want to play zip zap zop with him. Could be kind of dangerous.
No doubt. Yeah, that would not go well for you and I. Um, you know, another question that I thought of that I would love to hear you just riff on is there's a Bible verse out there that says, and it's Proverbs 17:22, really simple. Um, in fact, I'm going to read it here for you from the ESV, the English Standard Version. A joyful heart is good medicine,
Mhm.
but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And as usual, the Proverbs are so vibrant with
Yeah.
wisdom. And could you talk to us about that verse and really, because I sense you have experienced this both in your own heart, your own mind, but you've now tried to share that joyful heart as good medicine with other people. Um, Tell us how you've processed that verse in your life.
Yeah, it goes back to my testimony of using comedy to help others feel better because I saw people were feeling better, I knew that their cheerful heart, it would be great medicine for them. And by kind of like this osmosis, I was able to draw some of that medicine for myself. And, my heart was uplifted because I could see other people uplifted.
Yeah.
So, there's that aspect. And also with teaching improv to the ladies at Salt and Light, there have been times where I've walked in there and you could see that they're carrying the burdens of the world.
Mhm.
Because just because they're part of this program doesn't mean that finding a job, finding a place to stay, battling with the court system, because women and anybody that's been through sex trafficking, that's been used like that, either their handlers or pimps or whatever you want to call them, force them into drug use to get them addicted so that they stay and
Mm.
they're under control, or they use drugs and things like that as a coping mechanism because they feel there's no escape, so they have to numb the pain.
Yeah.
So many of them, because of that lifestyle, they have court cases, they have legal issues because of the life they were forced into. It's not any fault of their own, but unfortunately, the court system doesn't have ways to look at the situation and kind of help them through. It's like, you did this, you have to do this, you have to do this now. So many of these women are coming in, they're fighting for custody of their kids, they're trying to find a place to stay that's safe. They're trying to find jobs because with their records, and because they have nothing, they don't have the clothing or the look to impress to get a job. So it's like this whole vicious cycle of,
Yeah.
at least going back to that lifestyle, they'd have money and food. Now they're trying to rebuild their lives. So they're carrying these burdens. And in that hour that we're able to laugh, you see literally the burdens, the weight crack and fall off. They literally crack up because they come in and sometimes they'll look at you with this look that could kill, because they just don't want to fool with anybody right now because they're carrying everything on their shoulders. But a couple improv games, a couple laughs, and all of a sudden everything's on the floor and they're laughing, they're relieved. So it's literally the best medicine is to, for me, and I know for them, is to laugh. Because, and there's a great comedian that I really enjoy. I love anytime I see him having a special, I try to watch it. His name is Michael Jr. He's a
Mm.
Christian comedian. He gave an interview that I saw, and he said something there that's been powerful and has stuck with me ever since. And he said, "Laughter is the tangible evidence of hope." And I'm like,
Mm.
he nailed it.
Yeah.
Because if you can laugh, it means that there's hope, like cracking through the burdens and frankly the lies of the enemy that have weighed us down. But in the other half of that verse where it says, uh, a broken spirit, or from the NLT version, but a broken
Yeah.
spirit zaps a person's strength. That's so true. If you have a broken spirit, if you are carrying the weight of the world, carrying um, all the stresses that this world puts on us, it saps your strength. And if your spirit is broken because you don't feel the hope or the joy or the love of God, um, it can drain you. And that's where depression sets in, is because when you're down in this, it's almost like your cell phone. If you allow your battery to get completely drained and stay completely drained, it gets to this point where it's got memory of like, okay, we can only get this much charge. So your
Yeah.
the battery of your cell phone kind of gets into an electronic depression. Our hearts and our spirits can get that same way if we're constantly down, and all we can remember emotionally is being down, because our spirit is crushed, our spirit is broken. And that's why a joyful heart, or laughter, depending on your translation, can be the best medicine, because it kind of resets that battery to where you can be in a better place and you
Yep.
can find energy to do the things that will get you out of that place permanently.
Yeah, I think that's the start of where you might be able to identify if you're struggling. Like, speak to our listeners now about the signs and symptoms that someone and even themselves may be struggling with this broken spirit, with this depression. What does that look like?
Well, and that's the hardest part, especially for somebody that suspects it. If you suspect a friend or family member is suffering, it's hard because each case is different. There are no blanket answers. So don't think that A, B, and C has to happen for them to be depressed, or don't think that because they have A, B, and C, they are. You have to know them. And a few of the things that can clue you in to pursue investigating, uh, people that usually don't get a lot of sleep. It's either because they're wrestling with the weight of the world, or they're up late, um, trying to convince themselves to get up the next day. So if you see somebody that's constantly exhausted, it's either
Mm,
because they're choosing not to sleep because of their battles that they're fighting at night, or it, like the scripture says, their broken spirit is just sapping their strength.
mm,
So look for that as a sign. Look for somebody that uses humor, especially self-deprecating. If they're
mhm,
constantly making fun of themselves, it's possibly because they want to be you to make fun of them, and they want to make a joke of how little they think of themselves.
mm,
So that it's a sign, but again, none of these are blankets. Depression looks differently with each person. Um, One telltale would be is if you are in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, marriage, or something where there is supposed to be a level of intimacy. And biblical intimacy is not about sexual relationships. It's about being that closeness that,
yeah.
Jesus had intimate friendships with those three disciples that he brought up into the transfiguration. Those were his closest, most intimate friends. So intimacy is not about sex, but it's about being close, vulnerable. And if you're in a relationship with somebody, whether it's a friendship, marriage, dating, and there's a wall, even in that intimate relationship, where you can't get past it, that
Mm,
may be a telltale sign that they're hiding a depression or feelings of suicide or something. And when you find that wall, out of love, continue to bang on that door and try to get past that wall and find out what they're hiding. We had a friend, I won't say his name in case he watches it, but he was accused. They'd say his name and say, "You have your name face on," meaning, so like if it was me, they'd say, "You have your Dave face," which is the mask to hide what's behind it. And we would say, "What's actually going on? Take off the mask and tell us what you're really feeling." Because they'd give the patent Christian answers like, "How you doing today?" "Oh, I'm blessed and highly favored. I'm good." It's like, blessed and highly favored maybe once in a while, but sometimes you got to give us a little bit more.
yeah.
So I'd say if you have trouble getting past that wall and you can't really get them to open up, find a way to privately, and not over text, not over a phone call, uh, preferably not even via StreamYard or anything, or Zoom or
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
else. Be with them and just look them in the eyes and say, "Hey, are you struggling? Are you depressed?" And sometimes they may get offended. I'm like, "No, I'm fine." But if you're in that close relationship where you have the credibility to ask those questions, they'll appreciate that you care enough to ask, even if they're not.
Yeah.
But they may also be afraid to admit it. So, and that's what's so hard about it, is because there's no blanket.
Yeah.
The only thing you can do is love and try and ask. Sometimes
Yeah.
the shock of asking somebody straight up, face to face, eye to eye, maybe it'll be enough for them to crack them and be like, yeah, you know what, I am.
Yeah.
And
Sometimes that's all it takes.
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's this giant bubble. It just takes one little pinprick and it goes away.
Yeah.
Other times it's a much thicker balloon and you're gonna have to find a few spots to go after before that pops. But that's the beauty of intimacy and being intimately related with somebody, is that you can start seeing like this isn't adding up. Another thing is if somebody gets really bad news or goes through a really tough time, and they seem to recover a lot quicker than you would think they would, like a death, and they're like, "Oh, they're okay." Now there are a lot of Christians that are okay. Like if my mom dies or whatever, they're like, "Oh, she's in heaven. I can recover quickly." But usually there's still a mourning period. But if their mourning period seems really, really abbreviated, it's because it's been compartmentalized in the point of, oh, this is just another thing that I have to go through.
Mm.
So it just adds to that negative self-image, like, oh, this just happens to me. It's usual. So that's a good sign of they're still wrestling with something deeply inside because this new stimulus didn't take place, didn't cause the reaction that you'd expect. But again, I'm speaking from my experience and the things that I've been through, things I've seen. Nobody's depression is the same as the other. It takes being willing to go into battle to pull them out of this dark place.
Mm.
And if you love somebody enough, it's going to be worth it, because having arguments and fights and back and forth trying to pull them out is so much more valuable than trying to come up with a eulogy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. That's really good, Dave. Thank you so much for those points. And because we probably all know someone or we've struggled with it ourselves. And so, but tell me, as we kind of bring our time to a close here, what are some of the inspirations for your humor? If somebody's interested in maybe coming and seeing you, what are they going to get at a show where Dave and the rest of the troupe there? Where's your inspiration come from?
A lot of my inspiration, because former pro wrestler, so I like being physical on stage. Not necessarily with my partners, because my team is me and four women. So being a married man and them being women, much smaller, I cannot do the physical stuff
Yeah.
with them. But Chris Farley is a huge influence. I really love Chris Farley.
Yep.
Just the excitement, the energy, the seeming unpredictability. And then I also really love John Candy,
Yep.
because he was more laid back and more intelligent humor.
Yeah.
Not to say that he didn't go blue, because he did, but it wasn't like in your face, like gross. It was just adult,
Sure.
and he was very. I don't want to sound geeky, but he was cerebral in his humor. It was very
Yeah.
funny. It was very thoughtful. And I love Uncle Buck. I loved him as Del Griffith in Planes, Trains, and
Yeah.
Automobiles. So those two guys really are the big influences as far as me, because I'm a tall, heavyset white guy, and it's like these guys paved the way for me.
That's right, sure. So do you have any shows? You're in the Chicago area, of course. Tell us about any upcoming appearances that you might have.
Sure. At the end of the month, October 30th and 31st, I'll be doing a guest appearance at Gutty's Comedy Club. It's down in Greenwood, Indiana, just south of Indianapolis. And Gutty's is it's a clean comedy show, comedy theater. Everything that comes through there is going to be clean, family friendly. They want families to come out together and enjoy comedy. The two
No.
guys that own it, Steve Rivera and Dennis Tooley, great Christian guys that are using this as kind of an undercover ministry, because they want people to come in, whether they're backstage, on stage, or in the theater, to be able to have fun and have that experience of, I don't have to check to make sure if it's okay to laugh, because
Yeah.
this is clean. So anybody that's in the Indianapolis area, Halloween weekend, I'll be there, guest appearing with their improv team, their house team, Improv Aesthetics. But if you're in the area and you can't make it Halloween weekend, every weekend they're going to have great clean comedy that's there for families to come together, because you're not going to be able to almost anywhere to bring your kids to a comedy show unless it's a kids comedy show, and then the parents are sitting there like, Do they serve anything harder than Dr. Pepper here? But yeah, Gutty's Comedy Club, Greenwood, Indiana. I'll be there in at the end of October. Well Versed Comedy. We have our we did a TV show last year that's on. It's currently on 24 Flicks. It's on Creative Motion Network on Roku, and it's also going to be on 360tv.com. It's kind of a not a parody, but it's kind of a spin off the idea of whose line is it anyway.
Yep.
But we know because we're Christians that it's his line. So
Yeah.
look for his line. And as far as live performances, we're Illinois based, and I don't know when we'll be free to really get back in the theater and
Sure.
start
Yeah.
doing stuff. So
Well,
find us, and we'd love to love to see you whenever we're able to get out there.
absolutely, Dave. Thank you so much for that. Well, there you go, folks. Here's a guy who has been through some tough things in his life, but he's allowed God to use that, and now he's in the world, but he's not of the world. It's Dave Ebert, and he and his well-versed improv comedy group and his Gifts for Glory podcast. Brother, thank you for being on the show today. It's been great to meet you.
It's been great, and if I could just take another 30 seconds
Sure.
real quick.
Yeah.
My email address, dave@giftsforglory.com. I have that available as contacting for anything related to comedy, to book me for maybe coming to your church. But the most important reason I give that email out is if there's anybody that picks up this podcast or this video and you're struggling where the same way I was, you're in a deep, dark place and you're considering suicide. I don't want to preach at you. I'm not going to throw a bunch of scripture at you. I just want to listen to you and be there for you. You can email me anytime. It comes to my phone. If it's in the middle of the night, give me a couple hours to wake up, but I will respond as soon as I get it. But I want that email to be available to you if you just need to vent. If you need to have just verbal diarrhea and let everything out. Don't think that you have to filter it. If you need to curse to express your feelings, fine. I just want to be there for you, listen to you, and see what we can work out together. But if you feel alone, you're not alone. That email address is for you.
Absolutely, Dave. That's very deep and it's very kind of you. Thanks so much again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.